What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to basketball. And more importantly, welcome back to our season preview series, the series where we're breaking down all 30 NBA teams before the start of the regular season. In this series, we go extremely in-depth. We're going to talk about everything from rotations, depth charts, what kind of draft assets they have, what's their salary cap situation, off-season, trade ideas, everything that you need to be ready for the start of the regular season. In this video, we've got the really interesting Toronto Raptors, but anyway, make sure you guys like, subscribe, and comment. I've responded to every single comment on my YouTube channel up to this point, and I intend to keep on doing so. All right, let's get into it. All right, I did have one other thing to show you guys. As you can see, I do have like a dresser TV thing here now. There was a shelf that had a TV on it. It fell and everything broke. Now I got a new TV, new dresser again. Everything's right in the world. All right, let's go talk about some things. Alrighty, y'all. As always, we have a lot to talk about in this video, and that's why we got the preseason spreadsheet here. I still don't know what the hell I'm calling this thing. For those of you that don't know, I like to build spreadsheets to kind of help articulate my story, bring some visuals and everything that we're talking about in these videos to life. If you want access to the spreadsheet, it's a pretty simple process. All you guys have to do is leave me a comment saying something along the lines of like, hey, I would like access to the spreadsheet. From there, I'm going to drop you a link to my Discord. You then hop on the Discord, join, and then you shoot me a DM on the Discord saying like, hey, I was a person from YouTube. Can I have the spreadsheet? I give it to you right there. Nice, plain, and simple. I've given it out to a lot of people, and some of you have left comments asking for it, and I have you join the Discord, and then I never see you again. So I don't know what's going on with that. But regardless, it's a way for me to boost my algorithm and everything. You guys get a fun spreadsheet that you can play with and design your own things on it. Post the stuff on the Discord. We all talk about it. It's a lot of fun. But anyway, the Toronto Raptors. So the Toronto Raptors had a strategic retooling last year. Is that the best way that we want to put it? So the Raptors started the season off with a lot different roster, right? They had guys like Spicy P, Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, right? Like guys like Dennis Schroeder were on the team. Like these are good basketball players, and they did not finish the season there. Nope, not at all. But they ended up making like a bunch of moves. They acquired some draft picks. They were kind of like, okay, this core of players isn't really working, and they had all been on the trade block for some time now. Let's see what we can do. And they sent them all out to separate places and said, all right, Scotty Barnes, you're our guy. We're going to bring in some other young guys more so around your age, and we're going to see what we can do. The Raptors actually had like a decent record at one point in the season, and then they bottomed out. Like they just started losing and losing and losing. And it's interesting because individually the players, like they're like a lot of the new players they brought in, their stats like weren't actually like bad necessarily. So they just kind of weren't winning basketball games, and that's okay. It's not a big deal at the end of the day. But the Raptors, they kind of bottomed out. They ended up being able to like get a draft pick and everything in this year's draft. Nothing too high or too crazy, but they're in this weird stage now where I think a lot of us look at this team and we're kind of like, I don't know exactly what they're doing. And so I've added something to our franchise status options, because normally it's selling, rebuilding, growing, and contending. I don't know which of these they fell into, so I was like, we're going to add trying. This team's trying, and you know what? That's not a bad one to just, like, keep around, I feel like, is the old trying status, because, like, this team feels like it's trying, right? Like, it's like, okay, we've got a pretty decent roster, and we don't know if this young group is actually going to become anything, because, look, I think if you were to look at this roster just from, like, where it is right now, do any of us think that this current, like, conglomerate of players is going to win a championship? I wouldn't expect so. I mean, I'm never going to write anybody off completely, but like, it's weird, right? Like, it's a weird group of players that surprisingly play somewhat well together, so we're going to see what happens. So that's why we're calling them trying right now. That's the best way I think we can describe this status. Now we're going to talk about a couple goals, right? I always like to bring up goals before we get into all the more fun tabs that we've got going on down here, so that you guys can keep these in the back of your mind as we're moving throughout the video, right? So I've got 4 goals, actually. Normally I have 3. First of them, find shooting forwards. We need guys at like the wing and forward position that can space the floor around Scotty Barnes, right? Scotty Barnes is going to have the ball a lot more this season. We've got a little bit of shooting going on at the guard spot, which is cool, but overall this team could use a little bit more spacing, right? So I think that that's something we need to try to address. Prove to the fans that this is worth it is another goal of mine. I feel like, in Raptors fans, you guys let me know, right? How do we feel about this team and everything, right? It's a weird conglomerate of players, right? Like, you look at it and you're like, okay, we're not tanking. We're definitely not tanking. They're not necessarily selling. Like, they did sell, but it was more of a retool. And so I feel like we need to see something out of this group of players that says, like, okay, they could become something, right? Otherwise, it just feels like we're stalling more so. Like, we're stalling some sort of rebuild. And I don't like teams being in that mold. Like, these guys are so young that I'm willing to, like, give it a shot or whatever, but it doesn't feel like it's going to turn into anything. So that's what I mean there. Next goal, develop point Scotty. Scotty Barnes, we learned, can be an all-star level player last year, and it was debatable whether or not he should have actually been like on the team and everything. And like, look, I just don't care about all-star appearances. At the end of the day, it's an arbitrary statistic that people like to slap on arguments, like, this guy made the all-star team though. It's like, yeah, okay, it doesn't matter, right? It just doesn't matter. So I want to see them develop Scotty Barnes in a different direction. I think that he's the type of wing that when he has the ball, he should be able to initiate some offense. He should be able to create for himself and things like that, because he does see the floor pretty well. He's got a pretty diverse skill set. So it's like, okay, I don't want a forward that can like kind of handle the ball and like kind of distribute and things like that. Like, that's cool, but like, let's push this, right? We've got a young player that's starting to show something. Like, can he be a guy that's like a Jason Tatum, bringing the ball up the court and things like that, and operating it within the offense? Like, those are the things I want to see. So I think you have to develop point Scotty, and then literally don't gamble internally. I think you took care of that last year. This is kind of a joke, by the way, a Jonte Porter joke, if you guys weren't catching on to that. But yeah, don't gamble on yourselves. Don't do that. That's bad. That's bad for the team. But anyway, that's the Raptors. Let's go talk about their offseason, because it was a pretty in-depth one. Alrighty, y'all. Here we are with the Raptors offseason. We got a little bit more to look at in this one. Some of it not quite as important as others. I mean, all these guys are important in their own sense, right? But I don't know. There's some guys leaving last year that were kind of in and out of the team last year in itself. But anyway, for those of you unfamiliar, I break this down into 3 different parts. We've got drafted players. You can figure out what that means. You're smart enough. Player departures, players that were on the full-time roster last year that are no longer on the full-time roster. And then players brought in, so other guys throughout the NBA or foreign or anything like that were brought onto the roster for this full season and everything. Hopefully. I'm sure they're hopeful about that at least. But anyway, let's start off with the NBA draft. Jacoby Walter. First round pick for them this year, right? They had a couple first round picks this year. Or not a couple first round picks, a couple draft picks this year. Jacoby Walter was the only first round pick. Coming out of Baylor, I'll be honest, I wasn't too high on Jacoby Walter. Some of the things that we saw out of him: really good defense at Baylor, very pesky defender. I can't talk today. It's Monday for me recording this, so you know what? That just is what it is. But a pesky defender that can sometimes be an elite shot creator, right? He gets a lot of shots up. A lot of them don't always go in, right? Some poor decisions, like with the basketball at times, right? Some poor shots are being taken. Honestly, a pretty common trait out of a lot of Baylor players that we see coming into the NBA. It's not always a very refined system or everything there. So kind of an odd trait that we just notice. Good athlete though and everything. Is he going to be an impact player right away? Maybe not necessarily. He's going to be more of a project. The reason that some scouts have like some hope in him is because we've seen a lot of guys like Jacoby Walter come into the league recently and have some success. And what do we mean by that? We mean like these like 6'4", kind of like shot creating, like high volume shooting guards that come in. They've got good athleticism and everything. They've got some creation ability where they can get separation from people. And we've just seen it work a little bit recently. I don't see Jacoby Walter necessarily fitting in that exact same like frame, but I see what they're talking about at the very least. So obviously he's probably going to get a chance to get some sort of development on this team as they're trying to figure out their identity. That's their first round pick this year. They used their second round pick on Jonathan Mogbo, who was a very interesting player. When I was a part of like the pre-draft process and everything, I got to see Mogbo play, and a lot of people were asking me about him because he kind of started coming onto the scenes. We saw him just killing it at the combine and everything. People are like, hey, like, what do you think of this guy? And I'm like, I don't know. There's not a guy like him in the NBA. He's like an undersized forward that moves really well. He plays with a lot of energy, gets above the rim well. He's great in transition, like whether he's the one running, he's the one passing, like he's doing that really, really well. I don't know what to do with him. Like, where do I develop him? What am I supposed to turn him into? Is he supposed to turn into like a more athletic Draymond Green? Is that my hope for him? Like, I'm genuinely asking just because like I don't have like a blueprint to to look at for a guy like this. So I'm very curious to see what they do with a guy like this. He went a little bit higher in the draft than I would have anticipated him going. And I've seen a couple Raptors fans be like, I'm not sure how much I really like that pick even, but I don't know. He's an interesting prospect at the very least, and I think his motor's incredible. So like I want to give him a chance just for that reason alone. You guys know how I feel about these like in between players when they don't quite have a position. Like I think there's a role for combo guards in the NBA when you have a specific type of like scoring guard on the team, like a Donovan Mitchell or something like that, who could play like the one or the two. I think that's a little bit different, but I don't know. You need a specific team to make them work. Every other like in between position, I don't like it. I don't. I feel like if you're that in between on positions, then you probably just don't have a position and we don't have a spot for you. So I struggle to see the long-term thing with Mogbo, but something at the very least. Jamal Sheed, who will also be on the full-time roster this year. Point guard coming out of Houston. He was one of the better college players last year. Veteran guard, can do a lot of things well. He's a little bit undersized, but again, could just be a reserve ball handler for you if things start to go wrong at the point guard position, which you're not like incredibly deep at on this team. And so if things start to go awry, at least you've got a guy with a little bit more maturity than like the average rookie has. And then we got Ulrich Kromke. I believe, is he French as well? I think he's another Frenchman that came in. He was at like the end of the draft. Looks like he's going to be like a two-way player for them or something this year. Extremely raw, very young kid. Going to play like the forward position. We haven't really seen him do anything at like a high level yet, but he's a decent athlete for his position. So he's just going to be a long-term project for them to focus on. But those are the players they drafted. Now let's talk about player departures. Gary Trent Jr. was a nice player for this team, right? His efficiency and defense kind of like fell off a cliff last year, didn't it? We started to see some things really not go so well for Gary Trent Jr. I mean, he was still getting you 13, 14 points a game. I mean, a lot of the efficiency was coming at like the rim, where it's just like, okay, he just can't really play there at all, but he's still a good three-point shooter. That's awesome. That's where like all of his points come from. He can't distribute the ball at all. I mean, his assist to turnover ratio is not that great. I mean, he's not getting rebounds necessarily for you. And like Gary Trent's a fine player, but it was the defense that like completely fell off a cliff last year. But again, that team was so much in like disarray or anything. It's kind of hard to pin it all on him. So I don't know, is what it is. But Gary Trent's gone. He was on a pretty decent contract with them. He's going to have a minimum contract with Milwaukee this year, and so I'm sure they'll find a good use for him. At least you hope so. So Gary Trent's out. That's fine. You got other guys younger at the position and stuff that you can start to develop. Jordan Nwara's on the way out. A former like first round pick. He was a first round pick, right? I'm pretty sure. Supposed to be kind of a shooting forward. Didn't become that, unfortunately. I'm not sure we're going to see Nwara get another deal in the NBA. Just is what it is. I hate to be blunt about that stuff, but kind of is. We hope the best for him. He's going to have a career somewhere else, almost certainly, but not really in the NBA. You got Javon Freeman Liberty, who a lot of Raptors fans will tell me, no, like that guy's a guy. And I remember during my ideal offseason, like I watched enough of him this year. Yeah, he was getting you like 7-8 points a game, which was impressive for a guy like him, but man, his efficiency it wasn't good, to say the least. Like, he wasn't doing much else for you at the point guard. It's just like he was aggressive enough to go get you some buckets sometimes. I didn't really see the long-term fit in it. Not a big deal that he's on his way out. Jalen McDaniels, another project that hasn't really turned into anything, hasn't quite become like what his brother is. So, again, defensive wing, he's over. Where is he at now? Is he in Sacramento? He was a part of the trade, right, that brought Mitchell in. So, yep, he's over in Sacramento now. He'll be a reserve wing for them to try out. Is what it is. And then we got Malik Williams, who was technically on their full-time roster at the end of last season. So take that as you will. All right, players brought in, actually some interesting names. They were able to get their hands on Davion Mitchell, who's in the last year of his rookie contract. Davion Mitchell had a great rookie year for like where he was picked and everything. He had a nice rookie season, played good defense. The offense was fine. Offense has just been slowly like getting worse as he goes, and it wasn't much different last year until like the end of the season and into the playoffs. He was actually like kind of hooping, and he was back to like getting some buckets and playing elite defense and everything. So we'll see, right? I mean, this is the team that we're trying, right? I mean, that's kind of the name of this video is we're trying. So we're going to see what he ends up turning into in this team. He's going to get a chance to get some PT, and that's what it is. And then they picked up Bruno Fernando to be a reserve center, and Bruno Fernando has been a nice reserve center in the NBA. Brings a lot of size, can play above the rim and everything. He's not going to be an elite defensive player by any means, but again, you got some reserve size or whatever. So you look at this offseason, and it's kind of just like, I don't know how else to describe it other than, You got a bunch of question marks here, another question mark here. Sheed hopefully is like solid as a second round pick. You didn't lose anything too crazy. Like I'm not tripping about losing Gary Trent. You brought in a maybe in Davion Mitchell and a meh in Bruno Fernando. So it's just a lot of meh going on here. So I don't know. I don't really know what to make of this. They're basically just moving on from some other projects and trying some new ones, right? And when you're in the trying stage like they are, let's try some things, right? Let's try some things. But all right, let's move on to the rest of the roster. Alrighty, y'all, we're here on my favorite tab on the entire workbook. This is basically my ideal off-season spreadsheet that we've brought over to this series because it does a bunch of different things for us. We can, one, take a look at the current roster. What's their salary situation? Like, what do we got going on this team right now? Like, who's about to lose their contracts? Things like that. We have an overall team salary cap tracker, so we can see where we're standing in terms of, like, aprons, luxury taxes, things like that. We've got a draft pick situation. What kind of assets are we working with? And then, as you guys can see, a depth chart, right? Something for us to look at to be like, okay, what do we got going on with the team right now? And then by the time we're done with all of this, we should have a good idea in mind as to like, okay, what does this team need? What kind of assets do we have to work with? What kind of moves can we make? And then we'll try to make a couple trades from it. I know you guys are already looking at the depth chart, and I know some of you are already wanting to comment or something like that. Like, Grady Dick should be a starter. We'll talk about it. Relax, okay? Just relax, keyboard warriors, okay? Anyway. Let's talk about draft picks. I think that's a good place to always start off. Oh, I didn't want to go there. It's fine. It's totally fine. We're fine. There we go. Draft picks. Okay. This team just traded a bunch of pretty good players. They traded Dennis Schroeder, traded Pascal Siakam, and they traded OG Anunoby. There's not a lot going on this draft pick board. You would really think for a team that just unloaded that much of its like talent and everything and good talent that they would maybe have like a plethora of more like first round picks. Like we've got a Pacers pick here. That's kind of interesting. Otherwise, it's basically just the Raptors picks. Like they have all their assets, and that's good considering they're in kind of a state of like, we don't really know what we want to do. So it's good that they have all their own assets. But you know, when you actually like break it down, you're like, man, everything we just gave up. I mean, obviously they got players back, right? So that's where a lot of like the trades and everything went to. They got interesting young players back. So you can always turn these into more picks later and stuff like that. But that is something to keep in mind, is that their draft situation isn't anything special. I wouldn't say it's bad. But again, like you don't have like an extra couple second round picks to go get like a role player or something like that. Like you've got an extra like first round pick that you can maybe play around with a little bit. But otherwise, like you've got guys that you're trying to develop. And at the end of the day, that's probably better. Like you'd rather have guys that we've already seen them in the NBA, what they can do, right? And if they do have some promise like these guys do, then you'd probably rather have that than bank on some 16-year-old being great one day, right? I mean, that's just always the way you should think about it. But nonetheless, the draft pick situation isn't great. If we take a look at the salary cap situation for this team, for those of you that don't know, there's 4 levels to the NBA salary cap. If you want a real in-depth breakdown on those, go watch my first video or two in this series. I go into much more depth. But for a quick breakdown here, we've got the normal cap level right here. That's the same for like all sports and everything. You got the general cap. For them, they've run out of it. That's why it's at 0. Then you have the luxury tax line. Once you cross this one, meaning when this hits 0, you're now paying a lot more for your team to exist. And there's also like repeater tax. So for every year you're in the luxury tax, that interest compounds and it gets more and more and more expensive, right? The NBA doesn't want super teams for forever. So that's how they've tried to combat that. Then we have the first and second apron. Those are new things in the NBA that have been added to try to combat star players being traded all the time. The NBA didn't like when that was happening, so they've decided, like, we're going to add these new rules into place that basically say, okay, championship level teams, meaning the most expensive teams, when you start crossing these thresholds and going into the aprons, we're going to lock your team down. We're going to make it incredibly hard for you to trade players, move assets, things like that. You're going to be stuck with the team you have, so you better be sure this is what you want. And that makes it so that teams don't want to trade as much because they're scared to get into those aprons. But even more so, once they do trade, they can't really trade much more, right? So trades are just going to be down in general. That's just the fact of it, right? It's going to be harder and harder to trade this star level talent, which I think is good for basketball at the end of the day. And there's a lot of statistics that say that it's just better for fan bases and stuff. College basketball is suffering from that right now. So it's a give and take, right? We all like the star-studded trades and the Woj bombs, which, by the way, shout out Woj, man. We're going to miss you, man. We're going to miss you. I don't know what I'm going to do with just Shams telling me everything that's happening in the draft nowadays, but it's a transition nonetheless. So the Raptors salary cap situation, they don't have any more cap space, which isn't like the biggest deal in the world because they don't have any more roster spots that they have to fill, but they do have $7 million, almost $8 million in like flexibility before they'd hit the luxury tax. So if they want to make a trade and bring in some more expensive contracts or things like that, and that can mean anything. You could be taking on a contract for another team and you're taking on some draft picks, or maybe you got a player that you really, really want and you think that your team can be a little bit better, so you're bringing them in, right? I mean, you've got space to work with. So I'd say overall, they're in a pretty good salary situation, right? Like we don't want this team probably in the aprons at all. Like we want this team to remain pretty flexible, but I wouldn't trip about where they're at right now. I think we're in a pretty good spot. But anyway, let's talk about the rest of the current roster. First guy up, Emmanuel Quickly here, part of the trade that sent like OG Anunoby over to the Knicks. They got Emmanuel Quickly back, who a lot of us were like, hey, can this guy be a starting point guard in the NBA? He's been a really nice sixth man for the Knicks and everything. Dude can get buckets in a hurry. He's got the meanest floater in the NBA. Like, what else can this quick little like kind of combo guard do? And man, Emmanuel Quickly was pretty good for the Raptors in his time here. I mean, if we look at him, 18, 19 points a game, almost 7 assists, kept the turnovers like to a solid place, 37% from 3 on 6 attempts. We take that. The field goal percentage wasn't too bad either. So you ended up getting a guy that you're like, okay, I'm interested, right? Like, I'm pretty interested overall. Oh, wait, I was reading the wrong percentage. It's actually 39-40% on 7 attempts per game. That's even better. We'll take that 100%. So, no, Emmanuel Quickly, great timing, 24 years old still. So there's still some time to grow, I'd say. And, yeah, they ended up getting a pretty good player in it. He just got a new contract, getting about $32 million a year, which for young starter player, yeah, I'd say that's about where you have to pay him nowadays. It's crazy what you have to pay guys nowadays, isn't it? But Emmanuel Quickly is going to get another chance to be a starter for this team. Awesome. The other part of that trade, RJ Barrett came over. We all know RJ Barrett, former really high overall pick and everything. I've got a lot of experience with this guy in my personal life. Shout out RJ Barrett, man, in March Madness. It was a tough one. Got me on that one. But anyway, RJ Barrett, nice player, right? We all know he's a pretty nice basketball player. Since he got to the Raptors, 22 points a game, 39% from 3. Oh boy, we love to see that out of RJ Barrett. We were getting 6 rebounds, 4 assists. Turnovers were a little bit high. They were kind of trying to figure things out with this team, but is what it is. I thought overall RJ Barrett came in and was a great impact. He was learning how to shoot the ball. He was still creating and getting to the hoop like he always was. We just saw a big step up as soon as he got to Toronto, so we're going to hope that he can continue on that path. I mean, he's still young. He's only 23, so are we going to get a development out of this young core of Quickly, Barrett, and Scotty Barnes, right? I mean, give them a full year together. What can they accomplish? We don't know. They're trying, right? That's the best way of putting it. I want to bring up RJ Barrett's like shooting chart so that you guys can take a look at it, just because like I do think it was like more so improved from like his Knicks time, because the 3-point shot was so inconsistent in New York, right? Like really the only thing he was able to do was play in transition, get to the rim, things like that, right? Like the 3-point shot just wasn't quite coming together. So when we take a look at the shooting chart here, like obviously a lot of it's still at the rim, but at least you were starting to see like more of these corner shots now where he can be somewhat of a threat from there. Obviously he likes one more than the other. That's totally fine, but you're starting to see like a stronger presence from behind the arc, which is awesome. And obviously he's still getting to the rim. That's his bread and butter. And he was able to get you 22 points a game by doing it. That's awesome, right? That's awesome. Bruce Brown, one of the most coveted probably trade pieces in the NBA right now. We know what Bruce Brown can be. He can be a Swiss Army knife type guy on a championship level team, and we've seen him win one, right? That's awesome. Bruce Brown can do a lot of things really, really well. He can be a secondary ball handler for you. He plays good defense. He cuts well. Like, he plays well in transition. He can defend. Like, all these great things, right? Like, he knows how to play winning basketball. That's just what he does. He was brought into Toronto. A lot of people thought he was going to get moved and everything. He was part of the Pascal Siakam trade and everything. And we thought, okay, yeah, this team doesn't need Bruce Brown. So, like, are they going to trade him? And they didn't end up doing that. I mean, we could take a look at Bruce Brown's numbers as well since he got there. I mean, 10 points a game, not shooting it great from 3. He doesn't take a lot of threes. Shooting's not necessarily one of his strong suits, but I mean, he was a solid player for them overall. And I don't know. I feel like you have to trade him this year, right? Because I mean, like, do you really want to extend Bruce Brown long term? Does Bruce Brown want to be there long term? Does he want to be on a winning team? Like, we don't know. We just don't know at the end of the day. I feel like he's one of those guys that should be traded. But again, with how the tax rules work nowadays, it's hard, man. $23 million. I mean, he's worth $23 million, but it's hard to make those trades happen nowadays. So it has to be a very fine point. We'll probably explore a couple Bruce Brown trades in this video just to see what else they could get for him. But for the time being, he is on the team. I think he's a starter level player just because the other guys behind him are kind of young and can't quite be trusted yet. And I know some Raptors fans want to believe otherwise, but I'm going to tell you, you can't at this very moment. It's not logical. Anyway, Jakob Poeltl, great defensive big man. He can pass the ball too. Quality basketball player, right? We all like Jakob Poeltl. Nothing wrong with him. Not going to be anything phenomenal, but he's going to be very, very solid. He's an above average like center. Awesome. Great job, Jakob Poeltl. You got him locked down for a while. It's always nice on a young team to just have like an established center, right? Because just like the simple things like rebounding and like being in the right spot, being in the dunker's place, playing solid defense, all that's just kind of taken care of, and that just makes their jobs a lot easier. So it's nice to have. All right, next guy we got on the list is Chris Boucher, who Chris Boucher kind of like came onto the scene as like this like kind of mobile like forward slash center that could do a little bit of everything, and I feel like it's just kind of fallen off a little bit. I mean, if we go and look at like Boucher, where does he even fall in here? Yeah, getting you 6 points a game. I mean, his minutes are obviously dropping considerably, but he's not really spacing the floor necessarily like he used to. The rebounding numbers are fine for his minutes, that's for sure, but I don't know, he doesn't feel like a high impact player necessarily anymore. I mean, you can still throw him out there. I mean, he's got plenty of NBA experience and everything, but I don't know, doesn't feel like a huge impact player. So it could be another trade piece that you like put together to make something else happen. Maybe somebody needs a reserve big or something like that. I don't know. Scotty Barnes, obviously talked about him a little bit in this video already. All-star level player. Scotty Barnes is awesome, right? He can do a lot of things already. He's a young guy, and some of the things that we saw out of him last year is he finally had like a solid shooting season. Wasn't anything extraordinary, but in his first 2 years, shooting was like definitely a struggle for him, and that's fine. That's pretty common for forwards coming into the NBA. It's pretty typical, but you saw him get up to like 20 points a game, and mind you, a lot of this season was with Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby and like a Dennis Schroeder on the team, who those guys were just gonna like have the ball more often, right? And a lot was gonna operate through them. He got to operate with the ball later in the season. Things went really well for him, right? So Scotty was playing well, made the All-Star team and everything through like kind of a technicality and everything, right? Because wasn't there like some injuries or something? That was like how he made the team, right? I can't exactly remember, but anyway, Scotty Barnes was a really nice impact player for this team. Obviously, he's their best player and kind of their guy going forward. What lengths can we take him to? Because he does everything well. Where can we push him to? What's going to be his thing in the NBA, right? Or is he going to be another like NBA all-star like role player, right? And that's not the worst thing in the world. That's how I view Jason Tatum and Paul George. They're just guys that can do a lot of things really well at an all-star level, and they just fit what the team needs. It just means that like maybe not like a number one option type guy, and I don't know how many people necessarily think Scotty Barnes will be that at this point. I find him very interesting though, and I'm just so curious what you're doing with this team, right? Because like they obviously have a vision for it. I don't personally see it right now, so I'm curious nonetheless. But he got a big contract extension and everything, so that kicks in after this year. So shout out Scotty Barnes. Talked about Davion Mitchell already. Grady Dick. I told y'all I would talk about Grady Dick. He was their first round draft pick last year, lengthier wing slash guard that can like shoot the ball well, hopefully. Grady Dick started off last season pretty rough, and he's a rookie, right? That's going to happen, where the three-point shot just like wasn't necessarily falling. His efficiency was pretty bad. He was getting his ankles broken all the time, turning it over all the time. I'm here to tell you guys, that just happens, right? It happens when you're a freshman in college. It happens when you're a rookie in the NBA. I guarantee you these guys are just getting torched in practice almost every day. That's just part of it, y'all. And it carries over a little bit into your sophomore season, but by the end of it, we expect you to kind of be picking things up. So I'm telling y'all, don't worry about it. He ended up finishing up at a 36% three-point look, which is actually pretty good considering where he was at one point, which means he really got hot towards the back half of last season. Kind of tampered off a little bit again, but you know, at the end of the day, nice rookie season. Do I see this guy being able to be a starter right away? Not when you have Bruce Brown being an option, in my opinion, at least. Long term though, we want Grady Dick probably being the starting two on this team. You need a guy that can space the floor a little bit. If you're going to have like Scotty Barnes, RJ Barrett, and like quickly out there with like a non-shooting big and Pirtle, you're going to want someone that can really like space the floor, have some gravity on the team. Long-term goal for this season would be, can Grady Dick be a starter for us by the end of this year? So totally on board. I get you guys want him to start right away. Didn't show enough last season to me to warrant that without being there in training camp and seeing that he's just killing people, right? We got Ochai Agbaji in a trade with Utah last year. Again, kind of one of those, like, I don't know what to do with you type players. You like kind of built like a guard, but you should probably play the forward considering the skill set that you have. I'm not too high on him. I thought that trade that they made with Utah was kind of weird. The whole like bring in Kelly Olynyk and Agbaji trade, like they gave up like a pick for that one. Didn't quite understand it. I don't know. I don't really know what to do with Agbaji. How did he even play like last year? I didn't even like look at any of his numbers. 6-7 points a game, and this is his time in Toronto. 21% from three, poor shooting from the field and everything. Yeah. Not very good. Not very good. Assist to turnover ratio is actually scarily bad. So I don't know. I'm just not that big on him. I hope he can figure it out. He's still a young player, right? I mean, how old is he? He's 23. Yeah, I mean, there's still plenty of time to figure it out. You just got traded for the first time in your career and everything. But I wasn't a big fan of him coming into the league necessarily either. I don't know what he's supposed to do, Like, he's just kind of like a short forward that can play like okay defense or whatever. Like, I don't know. I don't really know what to do with that. So those in between guys, just don't know. Jacoby Walter, we talked about him already. Garrett Temple. Why is Garrett Temple on the team? Because his contribution on an NBA basketball floor is pretty limited at this point, because smart organizations go and get the veteran players to have on the team. You need the on-court coaches. You guys have heard me preach this in all the videos and everything. You need the on-court coaches. You just do. You need those guys on the floor, like in practice and on the bench during games and stuff. That's kind of helping to guide the rest of the team, right? So that's why Garrett Temple's on the team. Good for him getting another NBA paycheck. And then we talked about Fernando, Magbo, and Sheed already. Some cheap ways to fill out the back end of your roster. We love when teams utilize that. But anyway, this is what the team's looking like right now. If we look through the depth chart, it's interesting, right? It's interesting to say the least. It's not a deep team by any means, and there's a lot of question marks. If we look at the point guard spot, we actually feel pretty good. Obviously, Quickly was good. We hope Davion Mitchell can continue to be what he's going to be, and then we have an interesting, like, more mature second-round pick kind of riding the pine right now. Awesome. Bruce Brown doesn't necessarily fit this group, right? We don't necessarily need this type of player on there because we want Scotty Barnes having the ball, Emmanuel Quickly, RJ Barrett. We don't really need him, who can be kind of be that connecting glue piece. This team could be good defensively, just like with this 5, but offensively, like, I'd have a lot of concerns personally. So where does Bruce Brown fit long term? I don't necessarily know, but he's a good player. You got Grady Dick, who could be waiting in the wings. We'll see if Jacoby Walter gets on the floor, and then you've got Garrett Temple, who probably won't see the floor much. Looking at like the forward spots, we got RJ Barrett, awesome. Oche, don't feel great about that. Looking at the power forward spot, you got Scotty, and then you got Boucher is kind of and Magbo kind of not really sure what we're going to do with those. So again, lacking a bit of depth here. Jakob Poeltl, Kelly Olynyk, Bruno Fernando. That's a nice center rotation, right? Kelly Olynyk gives you a different option to kind of have that spacing forward, which when we look at lineup data, we'll see how effective that actually was playing with Scotty Barnes, because that was the big question. Like, hey, what if we got a shooting center and put it next to Scotty? What happens? Which is a good question to ask. I was asking the same thing. So again, I'm not sure I liked the whole trade a first-round pick thing for it, but Kelly Olynyk's on the team. He's another Canadian. That's awesome. Fernando, great reserve center, right? So you got an interesting team. You don't have a great asset pool overall in terms of the draft situation, and you're in a solid salary cap spot. So let's go do some trades. Let's figure out some ways that we could maybe try to optimize, like Scotty Barnes, right? Maybe we go try to find that shooting wing or something like that, right, to add to this team. And then we'll go try and trade Bruce Brown and things like that. Let's just see what we can come up with. Alrighty, y'all, so we're here on Fanspo. This is what we use to do like all of our trades and everything. Get rid of those advertisements. And yeah, this is just a fun place where we can like mock up a lot of these things. So the first trade that I kind of want to mock up is an interconference trade. I'm trying to find like more shooters to add to this team and stuff like that that are on similar like age timelines, and that's why I'm looking at Corey Kispert. I don't feel like the Wizards necessarily need Corey Kispert, and I don't think they're necessarily utilizing him the greatest, right? I mean, there could be times where he could be on the floor a little bit more. He is a good shooter. Everything else about his game is a little bit iffy, but like we just need some gravity guys on this team, so that when we've got lineups like RJ Barrett with Scotty Barnes, right, and guys like that, like, you know, let's get some other shooters around these guys, right? I mean, especially if we're not going to have like a Kelly Olynyk in necessarily. It's just we need some more shooters at like the guard or the wing or something like that. So if we want to do a Corey Kispert trade, what would they want back? You don't have to give him a first-round pick or anything like that, and I don't think he even warrants like a Bruce Brown type thing. Is this something where like, so he's on the last year of his deal. What might be interesting to them is my question. Are they more interested in like an Oche or something like that? I mean, he could be more of a player that they're looking for. I'm not sure, though. I'm not sure. So let's just say it's like Oche going over there, who he's a little bit less money. You've got a little bit more time to figure out if he's going to be something, as this team's trying to tear things down a little bit. They might not want to commit to a Corey Kispert contract right now, and we'll throw you like a second-round pick or something like that. Something like that could be good for the Wizards, right? Where they just do a deal like this. They have, like the Raptors get their shooter, right? They lose a second round pick. It's not a big deal. They'd rather just try to develop this core that they have. The Wizards get to try something a little bit longer with Oche on the team. Why not, right? So that's an option. Let's go try to find another like more shooting forward. I think there's actually a pretty obvious trade that we can do, like just thinking through players that we've traded commonly in these videos. We talked about Kevin Huerter, how he might not quite fit on the team that he's in just for whatever reason. Like in theory he should, but he just had such a weird season last year where it just wasn't working. I'm personally an advocate for the Kings to keep Kevin Huerter, but let's say that they just wanted more of a Bruce Brown because they're kind of missing a guy like that, right? Like a guy that can come off the bench, initiate a little bit of offense, just play around Sabonis. He's just played in systems like the Kings before and had a lot of success. Like the Kings and Nuggets play a very similar style of basketball, extremely similar. It's pretty much the same thing, but they call it different things. That's the best way I can explain it to you guys. So what if we did a Bruce Brown trade over here and we take a Kevin Huerter back? Where are the Kings at right now? So can that trade just work in and of itself? It can. So we get the shooting wing that we talked about. They get the player that they're a little bit more interested in, right? Did they have to give us a pick too? I think they got to give us a second or something like that. That's probably fair. Maybe 2 seconds if you really want to get crazy with it. But otherwise, I wouldn't do too much more than that because he's on the last year of his deal and everything, and then you have to pay him. So I like this trade a lot. I think this benefits both teams. I want to try and do one more trade though. All right, so here's my last idea for a trade, and this is okay, we're using this to both acquire assets and maybe bring another veteran presence onto this team to help guide the young guys a little bit. So we're bringing in the New Orleans Pelicans for this. The Pelicans probably, and I'm not sure about this, but I feel like they'd want to get off CJ McCollum's contract. CJ McCollum has been great for them and everything, but they don't necessarily need him now that they have DeJounte. They have other guys at those positions that are probably worth playing just a little bit more. You can use his $33 million better in other ways, right? So I feel like we can help the Pelicans off in two ways here. One, we'll take his money and everything. We can give them Bruce Brown, who's a valuable win-now player, and I don't think that money works in it of itself, but we need to cut $10.3 million more. Well, I've got a guy worth 10.8 at a position that you need, and that's a guy that can play center if needed and has historically been able to step out and hit some shots, so he could play next to a Zion Williamson. We do a trade like this, we have some success, and guess what? We're going to tell you, you got to give us some other stuff too. You got to give us some of these second round picks or something like that, right? Or something along those lines. I don't know. You guys fill in the trade part of it so you guys can kind of understand the finer details of the trade. But this in it of itself actually saves the Raptors a little bit of money. This is a way for the Pelicans to, again, get someone at a position they need, have a different, more versatile player. We take on CJ McCollum, who we could throw in here at the 2. He can be another ball handler for us. He can be a leader for this team. I think it's important to have guys like that. So I actually like this trade a lot, and I think it'd be pretty cool, but you guys let me know. But let's go talk about rotations. Alrighty, here we are on the rotation screen. I always put a question mark on this because I don't know what the rotations are actually going to be. This is just an activity we'd always do as coaches to be okay, where do we want players' minutes to kind of average out at for the year, right? So looking at the first 5, Manuel quickly want him playing a lot of minutes, right? Good young player. Let's see what he has, right? Bruce Brown, he's one of the better players we have on this team. This isn't a very deep and super talented basketball team, so giving Bruce Brown 30 minutes a game feels appropriate right about now. RJ Barrett, basically the same explanation as Emmanuel Quickley. Scotty Barnes, best player in the team, a little bit more, right? Playing him a little bit more that way. Jakob Poeltl, 28 minutes feels appropriate because we want to experiment with the Kelly Olynyk thing as much as possible too. That's why Kelly Olynyk's getting 20 minutes here. We want to see how the spacing center kind of goes because maybe Jakob Poeltl's not the long-term solution at center. Maybe we have to go find a spacing center to make Scotty Barnes work. I don't know, but we need to experiment with it enough this year to see. Grady Dick, I've given starter level minutes because we want to find out if this guy can be a starter as well. We're trying, right? We're going to try to put him on the court, see what we get out of him. Davion Mitchell just being another point guard option. Chris Boucher, he's got the NBA experience. We throw him out there, right? And then Jacoby Walter, the rookie, give him a shot, right? Let's see what he can do in some limited action and everything. See if we can keep him confined within the system. Hopefully he plays good defense right away. I have no reason to think that he won't be able to. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. If I look at the actual Toronto Raptors lineups last year, and this probably isn't going to tell us a ton because there was such a shift in everything. You see these lineups with Siakam and everything towards the top. I think that's saying in and of itself. I mean, here was basically the starting 5 that we've drawn up here, and it has significant minutes, but it had a Gary Trent who was a shooter behind it. That lineup was pretty positive, right? That lineup worked pretty well for them. RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, right? It worked with Scotty Barnes and Poeltl, but they had another shooter. That's why we have to figure out if Grady Dick can kind of be that other shooter for this team, because that's definitely it's an obvious missing piece for this squad, right? So that makes a lot of sense. What do we have this one here? Dennis Schroeder playing with Scotty Barnes and stuff. That wasn't necessarily a great lineup. recap. Again, there's just so many of these where we just didn't quite see it. Is there one with a Grady Dick and the starters? Don't mind me, just looking for Dick here. Just looking for some Dick. Okay, so we got Bruce Brown with Grady Dick, Kelly Olynyk, Ochai, and Scotty Barnes. That one wasn't necessarily working. This one was Emmanuel Quickly, Bruce Brown, RJ Barrett. No, I don't. So Grady Dick just like wasn't playing with Scotty Barnes like that. That's interesting. That's really interesting, actually. So we just haven't seen those two like on the court a ton together. It's just like this one lineup here, but again, they didn't have a point guard and they're playing with Ochai. So I don't necessarily know what to think of that. Let's go look at like the three-man combos, like what was kind of working for them last year. Scotty Barnes, Pirtle, Quickly. Awesome. We know that that one works. Again, RJ Barrett, Pirtle, Quickly. That's no surprise either. Like Quickly and Barrett were just great players. Scotty Barnes was obviously a great player for them, and Pirtle, when he's on the court, their defense just takes it to like a whole new level, right? So I feel like when we look at this first five, right, like you've got some good things here. Like the first five's pretty solid. All said and done, it's just you go to the bench and things like that, and you have question marks and like how good can this team really be? I don't know, but like overall, looking at the rotation, I don't know. Like, it's going to be interesting to see what you can make fit, because after, like, Grady Dick and Kelly Olynyk, I don't really know how to fit the rest of these guys in very well, so it's going to be an odd season. But anyway, let's go talk about predictions and everything. Let's wrap this one up. Alrighty, y'all, here we are on the predictions page. So let's do a little East recap, just because that's the conference that we're working in. Celtics and Knicks at the top. Nobody's fought me on that. That's awesome. Sixers and Pacers, I've got kind of in the middle. We got the Heat and Magic as the first two play-in teams. I have the Hawks as the last one. Bulls, Hornets, Pistons, Wizards, Nets here towards the bottom. Haven't seen too many people fight me on these. I've seen a couple people say I think the Bulls could make it. I think a couple people said the Hornets could make the play-in. Nobody's argued with me about these three teams, and I'd question you if you did. We hope that they play better, but just don't see it right now. Where do the Raptors fit in? I don't think you guys think that they're going to fall into these, so I think you guys are smart enough to know. I've got them as a 9 right now. Look, their first 5, pretty good, actually. And we saw just in like the little bit of lineup data, right, that like the lineup can be pretty successful. All said and done. Again, you have to replicate a certain other factor of trying to find a little bit of spacing, but overall, like, I think they can win some games. They'll be scrappy. I think a full season of Quickly, Barrett, and Barnes is going to be interesting to see where it goes. Like, I just don't know what the ceiling of it is. I think they'll be quality. I just, you know, where does it go from there? I just don't know, and that's obviously a big question to answer with this team, but overall, solid. And if you make it like a decent little pickup off the bench or something like that, find another shooter, kind of like what we talked about, I think this team could be in a spot to be in a play-in spot. But I also wouldn't blame you if you said that they were going to be outside of it. Like, I see like these like 3-4 teams is pretty interchangeable right here. The Raptors, Hawks, maybe not the Bulls as much. I just feel like the Bulls are going to be a little better because they have Levine and Vucevic still. And then like the Hornets, like they could surprise me. I don't know. But for the time being, this is where I got people at. But this is where I hand it off to you guys. Now, you guys let me know what you think down below. You always do. The comments are my favorite part of every video. Just make sure you keep it chill in there, right? If y'all are talking too spicy in there or anything like that, I'm going to tell you to cool it. And if you don't, then I'm going to have to hide you from the channel. Then you don't get to participate anymore. I'm not going to let my channel run like the rest of the internet where people just be saying crazy stuff all the time because they can hide behind a keyboard. But, you know, is what it is at the end of the day. Thank you guys for joining these videos. I love that we can do these 5 times a week right now. And look, this is video 26. We're almost there. There's not many teams left. I mean, how many more we got? We got the Bucks, Cavs, Nuggets, Pelicans. 4 left, y'all. 4 left. We're almost there to like the preseason and everything. We're almost there. Well, I'm gonna get you guys there. You guys just stick with me. But hey, seriously, appreciate it as always. Like, comment, subscribe, share. I don't know, YouTuber things. But hey, we'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks so much. Bye.